Starting. There we go. Hello, everybody. I'm Holly Blazina. I'm your host for our very first episode of Courageous Conversations. I keep wanting to call it, other C words keep popping up, but the Courageous Conversations, that's the one I settled on. So life is an adventure. And I know that like me, you are a lifelong learner. And I have great conversations with people about where we've been, what lights us up, what it means to be and to have a healed relationship to healing. And of course, making the connection between digesting food and digesting life. So I'm your host, Holly Blazina, founder and CEO of Big Gutsy Life. People come to me when they're ready to make the food and mood shifts to heal their gut using my Gutsy Type method. And today's topic is from hiding to healing. And so imagine a world where sensitive, powerful people are no longer afraid to live, speak, and lead as their whole true selves. That is the vision that inspires today's guest, Gayle Nowak, a transformational facilitator and communications coach who supports spirit-led entrepreneurs in shedding old identities, reclaiming their voice, and expressing their truth with confidence. Gayle is the creator of Sage Sensation Retreats and founder of the award-winning marketing agency, The Story Stylist. She weaves deep emotional healing with decades of storytelling and marketing expertise to guide coaches, healers, and change makers into bold visibility and heart-centered leadership in the new earth paradigm. Please welcome Gayle Nowak.
Thank you, Holly. I'm so excited to be kicking off your new show with you today.
I'm so excited to have you here. Thank you so much for being, you were the one who inspired me to do it now. And I know that that was not your intention in the conversation that we had a few weeks ago. It was something that just showed up and was present. And I want to let you know that I've been admiring the way you show up, and you've inspired so much healing in me already.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I know we were talking about that in the green room, and you're right. You know, it wasn't my intention to push you, and I'm not like that with my clients either. It just sort of unfolded organically, and I'm sure we'll kind of touch on this whole idea of visibility, forcing visibility versus really embodying it as we go along in the conversation.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. And I have an admission. I've got a few questions that I'm actually afraid to ask you. I'm going to ask them anyway, but I want to clarify from the start that I don't want you to think that I'm challenging your method. I want you to know that I deeply respect you and your work, and I love discourse, and I believe that truth is often found in paradox. So I'm asking for you to be with me in that space of paradox. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, that's totally fine.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. So can you start off maybe by sharing a personal moment or a season where you really felt yourself hiding?
Yeah. I feel like I've had quite a few of those, actually. So I think, I'll start with my business, which actually starts much earlier. The root of it starts much earlier. So I started my business in 2013, The Story Stylist, and I was specifically helping coaches find and craft and share the story behind the work that they're doing. And that's still a piece of my work today, but that was really what I was focused on. And I, professionally, I have a background in journalism and marketing communications and public relations. And so story and marketing and strategy and branding was part of my professional experience and professional upbringing. So I was coming at my work from that very strategic standpoint. And yet when I started to work with clients, what was happening is I'd get in the room with them, they would start to open up to me, they would get really vulnerable. And a lot of clients were I understand this now. I didn't quite get it then. A lot of the clients who were showing up had trauma in their earlier years, and it was informing the creation of their business. They were in the process of taking that pain and healing that and turning that into purpose. And that's what was happening for me too. I just didn't realize it at the time. So I'm working with these clients and they would say things like, I've never told anyone this. And by the way, like, this was happening outside of my business as well. A lot of times people would tell me things, they would confide in me and say, I've never told anybody that. And so there was a general awareness of like, okay, I guess people feel comfortable and safe to share these things with me. But there was no like formal training around being able to hold that kind of space at this point. And this kept happening. And I was like, okay, something else is going on here, because there's healing going on in this work. There's transformation going on in this work. All the while, there was this deep knowing that I was not sharing my own story. I was sharing stories, and they were personal stories, but I knew very well that I was not sharing a story that I felt like I was supposed to be sharing, because it was so vulnerable and it was so felt kind of risky at the time. And frankly, the truth is, I actually had a lot more healing to do around that story. And yet Spirit kept saying, you have to tell this story. You have to tell this story. You have to tell this story. And so I was hiding in my business. This was early on in my business. And, I played that game for 2 years, trying on other stories and ignoring that message of you have to share the story of your childhood, which I will get to. And it got to a point where things got really uncomfortable in my business financially. And I tried all kinds of other ways. I'm a recovering overachiever, and I tried all my default patterns to solve the problem, right? Set goals, meet the goals. And that wasn't working for me. And so the only thing left was to tell my story. And at that time, I didn't see how it was even relevant to what I was doing in my work. Mm-hmm. And today I can say, I understand that I needed to tell the story in order to see the relevance. Right. And yeah, so I was hiding, the truth behind why I cared so much about other people's stories, about helping them get their message and their voice out there. A big piece of that was I knew the pain. I deeply knew the pain of being invisible, mm-hmm. and being silenced, mm-hmm. because of my upbringing and the family I grew up in and the environment that I was in. And, I would say the other piece of it was I wasn't just hiding in my business. I was hiding in my relationships. I was hiding in my marriage. And this whole big push from the universe to share this story really cracked that open for me.
Right. Wow. Yeah, that's so powerful. Yeah. I know for myself, in anticipating our conversation today, I've had a lot of aha moments about my own relationship to visibility. So I used to suffer from debilitating stage fright. And yet for some reason, I chose a career as a performer. So for those of you who don't know me, I play flamenco guitar. I'm an award-winning composer, producer. Well, not producer, but I've produced an award-winning album. And I really believe that I love what you said about how Spirit was telling you, like, you got to tell this story. Come on, you got to tell the story. Because I believe that those desires are divinely given to us. And so for me, like, it's just, I was even when I was in it, I was just like, what in the actual heck? Why am it would be so easy for me just not to do this.
Mhm.
Why am I so drawn to get on stage and perform when it terrifies me so much? And what I now understand is that yes, that calling, it was like a sacred calling that was divinely given, and it was always meant to heal me. And kicking and screaming heal me, it did.
Yeah, kicking and screaming. Yes, I
Yeah.
totally get
And
that.
so
Yeah.
tell us, what does sacred visibility mean to you, and how is that different from how you used to show up?
Yeah. So to me, sacred visibility really is about showing up in our wholeness and our messiest, or our messiness, not our messiest, but it might be our messiest, right?
Right.
So wholeness to me does not necessarily mean the perfect packaged
Right.
part of us. It means
Right.
that and the not so polished parts of us, right?
Yeah.
And also, I think of visibility now much differently than I used to when I was in marketing and even in the earlier years of my business. It's really become a healing practice and a truth telling ritual and self care. Yes, I work with business owners, and so there is that business piece of it, that strategy piece of it, and it goes beyond that, right? Because visibility is how we show up every day, how we show up in our relationships, how we show up with, when we're going grocery shopping, right? It's how we show up every day, and we get to choose what that looks like. And sometimes there are, actually all the time, there's natural consequences of that as well, right? So it's not, it's become less a thing that I do, or less of a thing that we do as business owners, and really more about an awareness of how am I showing up? What energy am I how am I being in this moment? And being able to receive whatever comes as a result of that.
Mhm. Mhm. And I'm picking up on something that you said, like we get to choose how we show up, and that's it's not the same as control, is it?
No, no. A lot of my work really is about guiding clients to release that need for control. And trust me, Holly, and you might relate to this too, right? Um, Control was precious to me because I grew up in an environment where I had no voice, I had no control. Just kind of getting back to that origin story, I took a vow of silence at age 9 about
Mm.
the abuse that was going on in my household, and it took several years to gain the courage to share that, to speak up about that. And when I did, my family didn't believe me, right? And so very early on, I got this message of, your truth doesn't matter. And at first I thought, like, I really was afraid that the truth was going to hurt other people, like not even thinking about the hurt that I was going through. It's like,
Mhm.
I can't say this because it's going to hurt other people,
Right.
right? So there was this belief of my truth hurts other people. And then when I finally got the courage to come forward, it, what I thought was what I had built up in my mind about what would happen next never happened. Nothing happened. And I hadn't even imagined that. Right. And so that was just all the more confusing. And, as you can imagine, teenager, right? A teenager being on the receiving end of that. And so really I had to use invisibility as a survival strategy,
Yes.
right? And that made sense at that time. That was how I was controlling that situation. That was how I was protecting myself. And it worked. The abuse stopped, not because anybody stepped in, because I took control of my body and my surroundings as best that I could, right?
Mhm.
However, you know, whether or not I was actually in control of that, I can't honestly say, right? But I had that sense
Mhm.
of control. And that sense of control I brought into everything else from that point on, right? How am I going to manage how this person feels about me? How am I going to manage this situation? How am I going to feel safe and in control,
Mhm.
right? And I do
Mhm.
believe like we absolutely can source our own safety, but safety is different than control. It's different.
Yes. Yes. And it's different for us as adults than it is for us as children, or at least it appears to be. I mean, one of the things that has been just so mind-blowing for me is the way my outer world changes when I approach something differently.
Mhm.
And so if I approach something from the perspective of agency, then people see me as an authority. Like it affects the way people perceive me. It affects the way um, it affects what people think they can get away with.
Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
I'll give a quick example. Like I don't have kids, and in the cultural conversation, I've heard so many women say, "Oh my gosh, like all these people who keep hounding me about whether I'm going to have kids or not," and I'm just like, nobody would dare question whether I would have kids or not, or whether I should, or like when, or like nobody even, because it's not a trigger. There's no lock for that key,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
Like when somebody says, "Oh, does this key," like sometimes I think in the world people just go around with a particular key and they just try to fit it into different locks. So they'll think, "Oh, this door opens, like this key opens this door, let's go in there." But it's just like when they come to that, like the childbearing door for me with their key, it's like there's not even a lock on it. It's like there's no entry. So nobody ever questioned me about that. So I mean, and I think as children, we don't understand that we have that kind of agency. And in your case, maybe in the decision to be invisible, it's like, okay, I'm not showing up for that anymore.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
and how valuable was that for you, right? Because the situation stopped.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. You're bringing up a lot of really great points here. And that's, as far as the agency piece, right? And when we, sometimes we look back on our past decisions, and we're really hard on ourselves about it.
Yeah.
And yet, what I find to be true, especially in my work when I'm working with clients, is that it was a really smart strategy
Yeah.
for the situation, right?
Yeah.
Like how
Yes.
brilliant of a strategy is it in the face of no help whatsoever to find a way to create a little bit more safety for yourself, for example.
Yeah.
And um, I think that it gets tricky because we forget that we're not in that situation anymore. We don't need to hang on to it.
Exactly.
That's the piece, right? And that goes back to that control piece,
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And
right?
it's not that invisibility isn't still a valuable tool in the shed at certain moments.
Right.
At certain moments, it's really valuable, but if it becomes your MO all the time, then it's probably not going to serve.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, where do visibility wounds originate and how do they show up in adult life, especially around those trying to be seen in leadership, entrepreneurship, or creative roles?
Yeah. So they, this is a complex it's a complex question, because whether or not you believe some of these things, it shows up in the types of clients that I work with. So, I mean, we're talking about childhood wounds, right? And that's a very commonplace, but social conditioning, especially, I don't want to make this, man versus woman or anything like that. But the truth of the matter is, women in particular have a different path than men and are sort of taught to be pleasing and don't rock the boat and, shrink to make others comfortable. That's more so something that happens um, with women, and that's a piece of it, right? That gender programming and social conditioning, childhood wounds. And I work with a lot of spiritual entrepreneurs, right? And so a lot of my clients, their wounds go back beyond this lifetime.
Yes.
They have witch wounds, they have persecution wounds, they have some have taken vows of silence in previous lives, right? Or it's all kinds of it can come from all kinds of places, right? And so it just depends on the particular client. And maybe you don't believe in all of that stuff, and that's fine. But what I find is that there's usually some sort of unconscious, subconscious program or pattern that is at the root of these visibility wounds, right? So whether it's this life or past life, or whether you believe it or don't, there's some sort of pattern or belief that's running the show.
Yes, exactly. And in fact, this is an interesting thing, because just when we were in the green room, I was telling you about a healing that I just recently did around visibility. And it's so funny, because I had this story as a child, or like not as a child, but sort of my first visibility wound in this life. And I realized it's just like, oh my gosh, there was this situation where I was already scared. And the people who were supporting me, or felt that they were supporting me, they just kind of dumped me into this situation, thinking that they were being helpful and thinking that I would get over it. And that I would find out that, oh, I'm surrounded by loving adorers, which I absolutely was, but I did not perceive it that way. And in this recent healing that I did, it's like, oh, right, this was always going to happen for me, because I came into this life with that wound. And I find that I do a lot of, ancestral past life karmic healing in my work as well. And I find that, I mean, of course, I believe we've got way more past life content going on than what we can attend to. But one way that we know we need to attend to that particular piece is because there's a reference for it in this life, and it's affecting us in this life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. So it's not just like, oh, I'm just going to go dig up a bunch of past life stuff to, because I'm bored. No, it's because that needs to be healed in the here and now. And so how did those wounds impact spirit-led coaches, healers, and conscious leaders in your experience?
Yeah. I mean, I would say some of the things that are common that I see is definitely shrinking for the comfort of others. Definitely the fear of judgment, rejection. There's a lot of rejection and abandonment and betrayal wounds that come up. People pleasing. This whole idea of, I don't want to hurt anyone. I mean, that for me, that was that was my wound, right? Like, I don't want to, or it was a piece of my wound. I don't want to hurt anyone with my truth. And that is definitely something that comes up for a lot of my clients. And imagine how that, so you have a team, and maybe you need to have a challenging conversation with that team, but you don't want to hurt their feelings. How do you do that? Right?
Exactly.
Do you do that? Yeah. Or do you pretend that everything is okay, and yet you keep having this challenge that you need to have this uncomfortable, difficult conversation about. And the title of the show is Courageous Conversations. And I was thinking about this idea of courage and how it's on a spectrum, right? And so we often think of courage, we think of like the big act of courage, the charging into a burning building and saving lives. But courage can be in the mundane of things, right? Like courage can be having that uncomfortable, difficult conversation with someone. I mean, those are the kinds of things that I know require my courage. Being able to tell someone how you're feeling or what you need, like they sound simple and mundane. And I find that those are the things that take real courage, is simply being honest about how you're feeling about something, and being honest, even going into a conversation like that and saying to team members, some of these things aren't working and we need to have a conversation about it. And I'm feeling vulnerable about that and uncomfortable about that. And you might have some feelings too. And we need to find a way to work together to address this issue, right? It sounds, there's no high stakes here. This is just a hypothetical, but actually doing that in practice, for some people that takes courage. For other people, it's like, yeah, whatever, it's not a big deal.
Yeah, but I think the people for whom it's not a big deal, they're in the minority. Otherwise, our world would look a lot different than it does.
Yeah.
Like if it was easier, everyone would do it, and then it wouldn't be courageous because it would be the norm.
Right. Yeah. Great point.
And actually, even thinking of it in that way, there are things that we take for granted in our culture right now that used to be incredibly courageous. Like today, I happen to be wearing a golf skirt that, comes up to my thighs. If this was the 1800s,
yeah,
and now we just take that completely for granted. That's not on the courage spectrum. I mean, for some people it is. If you were from the Middle East, maybe that would be on the spectrum of, that would be on the courage spectrum.
Right.
Or it would be it might even be on the stupid spectrum. It's like if you're in a culture where people are meant to not dress like this, and you could be jailed for it, well, maybe don't do it. It's wise to not do it, right? So, and how have you seen energy in the body play a role in healing these wounds, either in your journey or in those who you've helped?
Yeah. So I want to think about this a little bit. So there's a lot of information out there about regulating your nervous system. And this is sort of an emerging place for me and my journey, but also my work. I had it was a few years ago. I had an experience. I was on retreat with my coach, and she brought in a woman named Dr. Deborah Kern, and she does chakra dance, or she did for this particular retreat. I think she does other energy practices and somatic practices as well. And so we did this chakra dance, and it just was absolutely awakening and activating for me, because I recognized after going through that experience, like, wow, I feel my body. Like I am feeling my body for the first time. Now, this was just a few years ago, Holly. I'm in my 50s now. So it's like I'm feeling my body for the first time. And I know that sounds silly, because obviously I felt my body, but I hadn't felt it that deeply ever before. And I believe a lot of us are living our lives from the neck up. I'm a Gemini, so I have a lot of mental energy, and I've lived up here for most of my life. And so a big piece of feeling safe is just feeling safe in your body. Feeling safe to be seen is about feeling safe in your body. And so
Yes.
the energy piece really is like working with shifting those default patterns or that default energy into more empowered energy, and also bringing it back into your body.
Yes.
And I feel like that looks different for everyone. For me, I've always been athletic. I've always been into fitness and everything. That was sort of how I was kind of doing it unconsciously and subconsciously. When I started to get more aware of that mind, body, heart, spirit connection, walking, breath work, qigong, right? Chakra dance, dancing,
Mhm. Mhm.
um, baths. Oh, I took so many baths, so many.
Mhm.
So just like these practices that really help you get more acquainted with how it feels to be in your body is a big piece of feeling safe to be seen.
Yes. Yes. And I think there's one of the things that has come up for me in recent years is the difference between the perception that I'm safe or unsafe and the reality of I'm safe or unsafe.
Yeah.
And I think, I mean, that's a whole rabbit hole that we could go down, which we're not going to, but but even just bringing, I think, a greater sense of perception of safety to ourselves in the situations in which we are actually safe.
Right.
And then even in those situations where maybe we're having a vulnerable conversation with someone and the feeling is that you're not safe, but is that actually true?
Yeah.
That's one of
Yeah.
the things that can bring us courage. And I also am finding for myself, I mean, with my work with the gut, I've gone through so many different iterations, and I'm finding that it's very much like the yoga system where it's just like, oh, and we need to add this and we need to add this. Like, don't throw it away because it's good. So that nervous system regulation, yes, nervous system regulation is so, so important. And we can attend to that in important ways. And at the same time, there's more. And so then we find, that somatic piece or those deep subconscious beliefs work and all of those different things. And honestly, something that has crossed my mind is that, I mean, obviously in our world now where we have the ability to now look at and process trauma in a way where it can actually move, because we didn't used to have those modalities. I
Right.
believe that one of the things that protected us in the past was that we did physical labor. So if you had a farm and you're just out on the land, that in and of itself was our healing modality.
Sure. Right. You're moving that, whether you're conscious of it or not, you're still moving that
Exactly.
energy. Yeah.
Exactly. And so that's one of the things as well that I think is, I would love to hear your percept or your take on this, because coming from the yoga system, I've been super aware almost since I started practicing yoga that we don't have to necessarily know what the content is. Like when there's something that's moving through us somatically, we don't have to, in fact, it's better if we're not in story. And so, how does that line up with sacred storytelling?
That's a great question. And there's a fine balance here, right? Because I've been in circles where there are people who are saying, "Oh, that's just a story I'm telling. That's just a story I'm telling." And sometimes, whether or not that's true, they might need to be in that place. And so I
Mhm.
kind of take issue a little bit. I take issue when people are trying to bypass the story
Yes.
that's wanting to come through, that was wanting to move through. I don't necessarily take issue with letting go of that story. And it's coming through for a reason. It might need a voice. You might need to speak something about that. And so why do we automatically go to tamping it down? Right. So I really believe in allowing it to come through and to be voiced, and to name the thing, whatever that thing happens to be, the feeling, the sensation, the story that you're telling yourself, the belief that it is, without judgment, like just noticing it, just hearing yourself say it first, right? Because how do you, if it doesn't have a voice and you keep pushing it down, how do you move it through? that's just my.
You can actually, you can. And at the same time, what I'm picking up on is that you're saying, well, if you're tamping it down, it's not going to move through. And on the other hand, sometimes somatically, like the example that I thought of this morning as I was on my yoga mat was that we're like, there's actually a ton of waste. There's the majority of our body's waste is expelled through the breath. We don't need to know that we're breathing out carbon dioxide to be breathing out carbon dioxide.
Yes. Yep.
And so what I'm like, the nuance that I'm getting is that if a story is present, then ask it what it needs. But if a story is not present, don't make one up.
Yeah.
Right?
Right. Yes. Yeah. And I love that you said, ask it what it needs.
Yeah.
And that's that's a big part of my work, is really just being present with what's present, being present with what feels true, and then getting curious. Why is this emotion here? Why, what is it that you need? Another piece of thinking about it from an energy perspective, a lot of times those energy blockages will come up. And in the energy work that I do with my clients, it's a conversation. It's like, invite whatever that is, invite it to come down and have some tea with you, and like, let's have a conversation with it. And what is, what is its role, or what does it think its role is right now? Does it
That's
still
a
need
good
to be
one. What does it think its role is? Because a lot of times, like, we've got these personality aspects, and they, like, just for example, the hiding, the invisibility. Well, I think my role, if that personality facet thinks its role is to keep you safe and invisible at all times.
Right. Exactly. And this is probably a lot like I'm not a counselor or therapist or psychologist, but I've heard of parts work, so it's probably a little bit like that. But yeah, it's like, okay, this is what the role is, and do I still need that? And what do I want to do with this energy? Do you want a different role? Can I just let you go?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Well, and certainly when I've been looking at some of those, it's like, yes, I'm just ready to rest. That part of me is going like, please let me rest already.
Yeah.
So yay, it gets to rest when I have that conversation with it. And so, yeah, another one of the things that came up for me is that studies have shown that memory is fluid. And so when we're working on a forgiveness process, we might notice that the way we tell a story at one time is different than the way we tell it at a different time. And the way that that our memory holds those events, or how those events unfolded, that it changes as we heal. That it's like,
yes, yeah.
Like, basically, if you take a memory and you leave it alone, it'll be in a little time capsule exactly the way that it was. But as you continue telling the story, the memory will change. And so, yeah, recently this healing experience that I had felt so complete that I just don't even remember what the whole story was around it. Like, I remember that it was something around visibility. And so in that case, it's a non-question, right? Obviously, I'm not going to tell that story because I don't remember it, and I'm not going to make a point of going and digging it up because I don't need it anymore. Right. And at the same time, how do we honor storytelling as our stories change? How do, like, what have you ever grappled with that one?
Yeah, this is actually, it's coming up in a lot of conversations that I'm having lately, where especially with the origin stories, the origin of how people got started in their business. And what I'll say is that, sometimes sometimes that original story gets to evolve or gets to get released, and maybe there's a new story that feels more in alignment. And so I would say, like, hold it lightly, like, in trust, and trust how you're feeling about it. I'm still telling the original story, but I totally get what you're saying about the more healing you do, the different it feels, the more different it feels, right?
Mhm.
How I told that story for the first time, where I felt like I was going to throw up and I was terrified of the consequences. I was still I was telling it in my wounding, and I don't recommend. I had to go through that to understand. I see now that I had to go through it in that way to understand, so that I could help my clients, through that process of discerning, or am I telling this out of my wounding, or am I telling this out of my healing,
Mhm.
right? And so, I've done a lot of work since then to be able to tell that it has no charge over me anymore,
Yes. Yes.
right? Um, and interesting what you say about the memory too, right? Because I've let go of kind of those things that I was holding on to, the
Mhm.
anger, the bitterness, the
Mhm.
grief. I've let
Mhm.
go of that. And so even those memories I wouldn't say they don't affect me, but they don't have the same charge
Right.
anymore. So that does happen. That does happen. Um, and it's also okay to just, like, if that story doesn't align with who you are and where you are right now, it's okay to just let it go and
Well,
share a
and
new story.
it's so beautiful. I just got this aha that your business is the same as all your other relationships.
Yeah.
If you and I
Yes.
get together for coffee and I tell you a story that happened to me, I don't necessarily need to come to you and tell you the same story in the exact same way every time. Our friendship
Right.
gets to evolve and our business gets to evolve too. And
Absolutely.
maybe that sacred visibility is also meant to be there's a word that's ephemeral, I guess, is where it like where well it's like music, right, where you play the notes and they disappear. You're
Yeah.
never going to play those notes exactly the same way twice,
Right. Right.
and so
It's
allow
really
that.
interesting too, because, coming from a marketing background, right? I mean, I don't know how much you know about marketing, but in marketing, it's like same message, same story, same, repeat, repeat, repeat. And there's some truth to that with business. You want a consistent message and brand, but that doesn't mean saying the same exact thing in the same way again and again and again. You get to evolve. And you and I, like, we're in the business of transformation. So we're going to evolve
Well,
as
maybe if
people.
we count then.
Yeah, right. And our businesses are going to evolve. I've been in business for 12 years. I'm still talking about story. I'm still talking about visibility, but I'm in a very different place than where I was when I started.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. And you describe being seen as a form of self-care or healing, and I noticed for myself and kind of diving into that, um, it even goes beyond that. So looking at my experience, for example, again, as a performer who started off with this debilitating stage fright and becoming the person, I mean, for me, as that person who was so scared to show up on stage, I knew, like, I just knew when I played on the couch, I played my best.
Yeah.
And it was my deepest desire to bring all of that to the stage and leave it all on the stage. And so for me, becoming that person who was finally able to do that, I would say that went so far beyond self-care, so far beyond healing. It's like I was able to completely show up in a brand new way because of the years of transformation that I went through around that. And so I'm curious to know, how has your relationship to being seen changed through this work.
Yeah. At first, I want to acknowledge, you said something really important here that I want to call out. You mentioned your desire. And that desire was stronger than your discomfort. And that led to your commitment to being the person who could get up on that stage and leave it all on the stage, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I relate to what you're sharing so well, because it reminds me, your music is kind of like writing was for me. That communication is a gift that I came here with.
Mm-hmm.
And yet at the same time, it was also really challenging in certain ways for me. And I think that this is, anybody who's into astrology, right? Like, this is the Chiron wound, the thing that we're really good at, helping other people, but not so good at helping ourselves. And that's really what communication was for me. Like, just so wanting to connect with people and communicate with people. And before that got shut down at an early age, in probably in a very innocuous way. I was just sharing with somebody else about how I remember, my mom and my grandmother calling me a chatterbox, like when I was little, like 2-3 years old. And the impact of that, just that very harmless, there was probably nothing too pointed about it, but children absorb things in certain ways, right? And we don't necessarily have the faculties to recognize, like, oh, they just, they just need a break, right?
Right.
They just need some peace. Again, I am a mom. I understand it from as an adult, but as a child, it was like, oh, they don't like me talk. They don't like it when I talk, right? Like, that's probably how I processed it. And yet, so wanting to have that connection with people, so wanting to talk and converse and communicate with people, and yet a piece of that feeling really shut down. So I know I'm getting a little off track here. How's my relationship with visibility now? And
like how has it changed through being your own first client, in a sense?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I had to learn to have a lot of compassion and grace for myself. I had a really mean inner critic, really mean. And I had to work on that. I had to recognize that even though I had strengths in some of these areas, I had deficits, and that some of those deficits weren't my fault, right? I don't know how much you know about childhood emotional neglect, but that was also a big piece of my experience.
Firsthand, I know, actually.
Yeah. And the thing is with CEN, it's like you don't even know what your needs are.
Yes.
Right? And so here I am as an adult, like, learning these things that other people learn much younger. Right? While also having
some other people learn them much younger. I mean, this was one of the things that I think this is a really typical thing, is that we when we're living inside our own head and not telling our story, we think we're the only one.
Yeah.
Like, we think that we're singularly, broken, wrong. There's something so singularly shameful about us that we can't heal. And yet isn't that why we need story?
Yes. And it's also why we need community, and we need safe places to heal in sometimes. Sometimes we can heal, on our own and in the privacy of our own home. And sometimes we heal better when we're in groups. And that was a big piece of it for me as well, is really finding communities that really knew how to hold that kind of a container where it was safe to be vulnerable and share deeply and be just witnessed. And,
Mhm.
at times I needed help from my coach to name what I was feeling. I knew I didn't feel good, but I didn't have the words for it.
Right.
And to have someone guide me toward, it's okay for you, because then I would go into, I shouldn't feel that way.
Right.
And that's
Yeah.
the CN,
Yeah.
that's being gaslit and dismissed. And, that's just how my brain was working. And so I really had to unlearn a lot of those things to recognize,
Mhm.
like, yeah, it's okay when I show up messy, when I'm upset, when I have feelings. It's
Mhm.
okay to show
Mhm.
those things. Um, in the right, in obviously, like, there's a whole other conversation about oversharing and everything, but I think that that's more along the lines of sometimes we're oversharing because that's a trauma response too, right? And so we
For
do need to
sure.
have boundaries. We do need to have discernment, and that's a whole other set of skills, right?
It is, and it's a set of skills that you develop after you open up and share. I
Right.
know for myself, I had, and I wrote about this in my newsletter this week because the first piece of music I wrote, like, I was experiencing some really difficult feelings at the time that I wrote it. And the first time I shared it with my mentor, I remember sitting in his home at his dining room table, where so he was sitting on one side of the table and I was sitting on the other, and I played this piece of music which was just, again, I wanted to vomit. And at the end of it, I told him how I said, it feels like it's too personal for me to be
Mm,
sharing this. Like, it just felt so raw,
right.
and it felt too personal. And he said, well, would you like to hear what it's like for me listening to that? And I said, yeah, sure, please. And he said, I don't, he said, in that music that you shared, he says, I don't hear the story of it. I don't hear that it was difficult for you emotionally. Like, I don't hear any of that stuff. He says, I'm just witnessing you playing as a person who loves the guitar.
Mm,
And I was
yeah.
like, wow. So, I mean, for me, it was just like, oh, great. A whole world just opened up where I get to, and again, I have no recollection of what was the content
Right.
of that piece. I mean, I wrote that piece 20 years ago. And now I go and it's also completely transformed. So yeah, so it's just yeah, I mean, it's like the way that we feel in the moment isn't necessarily the way that people perceive us, even if they do know what the content is.
Yeah, that's so true. That's so true. It's one of the things that I love about story work and in groups is when we share our stories, I always love to invite people to share what they heard in another person's story, because a lot of times we have our own, what do they call it? We have our own darlings in our story, right?
Yes.
Like, we have the things that we think are the most compelling or powerful or vulnerable, and it's
Mhm.
something else completely for the audience, or for the
Yes.
person who's hearing it. And so
Yes.
I love that you shared that, because that's exactly what happens, when I'm doing story circles with people.
Mhm. Beautiful. And if someone recognizes themselves in some of what we've shared here, and they feel that pull to be seen, yet they're still holding back or hiding, what is one small step they can take already this week to start to shift that for themselves?
Oh, that's a great question. Hmm. Well, I'm really working in the world of truth right now. And so I would say, ask yourself, what's a truth that I haven't said out loud?
Good one.
What's a truth that I haven't said out loud? And maybe it's something that you journal about, maybe it's something that you say to yourself in the mirror.
Hmm.
Maybe if you're feeling a little braver than that, you tell someone you trust that true thing that you've been keeping inside.
Right. Beautiful. And if people feel called to work deeper with you, do you have a way? I mean, I know you have a way for them to do that. So, what would be their first step that way? How would you like them to do
Yeah.
that?
So I am gonna, let me see. I'm gonna put my website in the chat here so they can come to GayleNowak.com.
Mm-hmm.
There's all kinds of free resources there, but also if you want to have a conversation with me about potentially working together, you just got to go over to the Work With Me tab. I always like to have a conversation first. I have different ways of working with people. I have private coaching. I'm doing a retreat next month. And then I have some workshops and what have you that I do throughout the year. So really depends on where somebody's at. So the best place is really to just go over to my website, check out my blog, check out my free resources. And then if you really want to have a conversation with me, just fill out the form under the Work With Me page and we'll get on a call and we'll have a chat.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I love that. And so, as part of my commitment to courageous conversations, to living large and living courageously, um, I decided that I'm going to ask this to my podcast guests. And also, I'm going to share something. So, what is something that is big or small that you've done recently in your life or your business that required a new level of courage?
Recently. Okay. Recently. This is a tough question.
It doesn't, I mean, to your point earlier, it doesn't have to be running
The
into a
big
burning.
thing,
Yeah,
right?
like it could be
Yeah.
just a little thing. I mean,
Yeah. I think for me, it's really making this shift around seeing marketing and visibility as only a business function. It's so
right.
much deeper than that.
Mhm.
And there's not a lot of marketing coaches or marketing consultants out there who talk about it in that way. And it's
Yeah,
not for everybody. Not everybody wants to do that kind of inner work and self-awareness and reflection. And it can be a vehicle for that. I work with a lot of holistic practitioners, a lot of spiritual entrepreneurs who don't like marketing. They don't like sales.
right.
And little tough love here, like you don't have a business if you don't have marketing and sales, right? And so for me, it's
Absolutely.
like, how do we shift your perspective around marketing and sales? And I get why, some people are like, it doesn't feel good, because we've seen so many examples of marketing and sales that doesn't feel good, but that doesn't mean that you can't do that in a way that feels good and true for you. And so
Yeah.
really shifting my own messaging around, yes, we want you to have clients and we want you to, have visibility opportunities and collaborations. And if you're willing to go there, marketing can actually be a healing journey for you. Visibility actually can be sacred, right? It can be a sacred
Yes.
Practice.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
it's new languaging for me, fairly new languaging for me, and
Yeah.
it did take courage to go there.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I just want to mirror back to you the impact of that, right? Because I've never heard the term sacred visibility, but it's just like, oh, but it is. It is. And even in hearing that term the first time, it's like, well, what is it? And then, reflecting on my own journey with that in the areas where I feel like I've got a little more mastery than I used to have. So yeah, yeah. Um, One of the things that I did recently, and like I said, I'm committed to sharing this too. Um, I had the opportunity recently to go to an indigenous fasting camp. And I fasted for 4 days and 4 nights with no food or water. And it was just like, I was so scared when I made the commitment. It's interesting, right? Because I was so scared when I made the commitment to do it.
Mhm.
And yet it's one of those things where what I learned from doing that is that I'm not running the show here.
Yeah.
I'm not running the show here. So like just let, to let it come through me. May it come through me. And the vulnerable work that I'm continuing to do right now is to have mind step aside as I step back into my life and say, okay, mind, you don't have to have all of that. Like just let it come through you.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So
And what an experience of surrender too,
yes,
right?
yes, yes.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I woke up on the fourth day and I wrote in my journal because like some people die after 3 days of no water. And so I wrote in my journal, I am a miracle, for the grace of God go I. And it's just
Yeah.
like, okay, take that into your life and business, Holly, like do that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so it's like literally, and this actually leads me into my second question, because I believe the work that I do with my clients is courageous because it is so fundamental to our being human to fear death, and therefore we fear life. And so when clients work with me, they face death as they let go of those personality facets that don't serve them anymore. And each one of those has their own unique fear of death. And then I and they, we end up recreating ourselves in a new way.
Mm,
So the question is, why is it courageous of your clients to work with you? And what do you admire about them for undertaking your work?
yeah. For all the things that you just said, right? Like, so we think about life and death as like the beginning point and the end point, but it's cycles of living and dying,
Yes.
death and rebirth, right?
Yes.
And so stepping into a container with me does mean you're going to be letting go of something. Something will die.
Hmm.
An old version of you, right? But something new, new possibilities, new ways of being are also going to happen.
Yes.
The truth of the matter is, in order for those new possibilities and new ways of being to come in, the old ways need to go. We need to release them. And
Yes.
that
And
does
it's not
that
always comfortable. Sometimes it's
it's
messy.
not. It's
Sometimes you're
not
going to get
because
egg on your face.
yeah, it's not comfortable because it's new and different for us. And I'll be honest, it will, when you start showing up differently, it changes the energy of a room.
Yes.
It
Yes, it
changes the
does.
energy of your relationships.
Yes.
And so you'll start to notice. I mean, this definitely happened to me, and it's not always an easy thing to experience, and yet at the same time I wouldn't have it any other way. But when I really started to step deeper into my own healing work and really make some transformative changes in how I was showing up to my life
Mhm.
and in my relationships and what I was willing to put up with and not put up with anymore, a lot of people vibrated right out of my life,
Yeah.
and some of them, it was like peaceful, no drama, no conflict, and then others not so much, right? And so these things happen. Maybe we leave a relationship, maybe we leave a job, but it's all in service to really being true and honest and authentic with
Yes.
ourselves.
Yes.
And I get it. That takes courage. It takes
Yes, it
courage.
does. Yes, it does. Yeah, it takes courage to rock the boat. It takes courage to rock your world. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Gayle, thank you so much for this juicy, juicy conversation. What a great first episode for courageous conversations. For those watching and listening, I want to share the next episode is on Thursday, July 10th, and it is with tantric massage therapist Megan Bale. So that is also going to be a really interesting and juicy conversation. And this was my note to self this morning. It's like, oh, I'm going to share about this and I haven't created the link. So since you signed up for this, just know that I will make sure that you're aware of the link for that you know how to join when you're ready to. And in the meantime, I also have a workshop that I'm doing next week, and it's all around shifting subconscious beliefs. And there's 4 core beliefs that in the embodied vision work that I do, we shift those 4 first, because they're just so those ones are so sticky that the rest of the work that you do will go much better once these 4 beliefs are like out of the way. So I'm dropping the link for that into the comments here. And thank you once again, Gayle, for being here and for the inspiration that you are. And I see we've got Tamara, we've got another person, T here, we've got Stephanie, Sam, Megan, Judith, Jessica. So thank you very much to all of you for coming live. And yeah, I'm looking forward to more of your work, Gayle. I really feel that we're going to stay in touch, and we're going to, I don't know, something juicy is going to transpire in our friendship.
Yeah, I feel that too. And thank you so much for inviting me to be your first guest. And I'm looking forward to your next episodes. And thanks to everybody who came on to the live. It's great. I really appreciate your time and your energy today.
Yeah. Thank you. Have a great day, everybody. And we'll see you next time.